All right, welcome everybody. So I'm doing a lot today. This is kind of a test for me. This is my first time to try to use a setup of mine where I'm going to be doing some kind of smaller work. So I've got a little setup here. I'm going to have a breadboard, and we're going to see how well it works for me to show you some detail work. And so hopefully this all works out. So what we're doing today is kind of an introduction to soldering altogether, but specifically we're talking about soldering header pins onto an Arduino Nano. So if you ever bought an Arduino Nano, there's these tiny guys. And now I usually buy the off brands. Sorry, Arduino. Um, but nonetheless, they oftentimes come. They're very flat, which is good. Being flat means that you can uh, you can attach them to things, and it doesn't cause problems. You can make it as uh, a very small profile. But if you want to actually use it in in a test circuit or something, you really need pins to get it to attach to your breadboard. So most of these ship with header pins, and so the header pins, basically what they do is we're going to solder them onto the Arduino, and then it'll be able to fit nicely onto our breadboard. So at the end, it's going to look like this. And so I'm just holding those pins on there right now. They're not soldered in. And so that'll allow us to stick that onto our breadboard. Now sometimes they sell them like this already soldered, and sometimes you want them already soldered, sometimes you don't. I like to buy them flat and then solder on the header pins myself. And so that's what we're going to do today. So a little introduction to soldering. What do you need to solder? Well, the first thing you need is a soldering iron. And you can use, these are not expensive. They're not difficult. You can get them for $10 to $15 at Walmart. I have heard that you should stay away from the ones at Harbor Freight, the $5 ones at Harbor Freight, because they can actually be dangerous because they heat up too hot. Um, but this is just you can get these for about $10. And so this one's off, so I'll touch it and it's not going to hurt me because it's off. So we'll turn it on in a minute. But here's the tip, and the tip is what does the most of the interesting work. This is the part that heats up really, really hot, and it attaches the solder to the joint. So basically, what's happening when you solder something so here is the actual solder itself, and what happens is this little bit of metal gets heated up and it liquefies and it goes into the joint, and it basically binds with the metals that are on the circuit board and kind of creates a single solid mass. So it's not so singular and solid that you can't get rid of it because you can desolder it, but it does kind of act like a single unit. It is a really strong joint both mechanically and electrically. So basically, what you're going to do is you're going to take your soldering iron and you're going to touch it to a joint. And when you do that, you're going to also touch the solder to the joint, and that's going to heat up the joint and the solder. They're both going to be hot. The solder is going to flow into the joint. Then you remove the soldering iron, and it will quickly cool and be solid. So there's a lot of nice things about solder that make it work for this. First of all, is that it's got a relatively low melting point compared to the rest of the components of the circuit board. So when we melt the solder, it's going to melt the solder, but it's not going to melt the components on our circuit board. And as long as we aren't just completely bad with it, it's not going to melt our PCB either. I mean, we can touch this a little bit to our PCB, and it's not going to hurt it. Now, if you dig into it, it might, but just barely touching it or some incidental contact's not going to be a problem. Um, Another thing to note is that this is the barrel, and this also gets very hot, but it is not quite as hot as the tip. This is kind of where the heat dissipates through. And so both of these are very hot. So one of the things that you need is a place to store it. Now, most soldering irons come with a little tiny stand that you can set it on. I prefer to buy this Helping Hands. I do get this from our Harbor Freight, and it's got a little place that I can um, I'm running out of cord here. I've got a little place that I can kind of set it, and this um, this wire is actually going to dissipate some of the heat for me, and it's going to uh, make it so that it's less dangerous. So this does get very hot, and it takes a while to cool down. The other thing that you need is a damp rag. And so we're going to use this to wipe the tip, because sometimes you get kind of burnt metal and burnt other things on the tip, and you need to clean it off. And so that's what you use the rag for. So soldering is actually pretty straightforward. Another part of it, which I'll show you in a minute, is that we're actually going to put, before we do anything, we're going to put solder on the tip. And we do that for a couple reasons. First of all, putting solder on and wiping it off kind of cleans it. But then we're going to add solder again. And what that does is it kind of prepares the tip. Uh, the solder itself transfers heat better than the soldering iron. So basically, some parts of your soldering iron, especially old ones like this, um, the different parts of your soldering iron are going to transfer heat better than other parts. And so having some solder on there actually helps the heat flow more evenly around the soldering iron. So it's called tinning the tip. Um, and so one other thing I want to point out that your solder does is your solder actually, most solders are rosin core. And so they include a little bit of what's called rosin, which helps clean your circuit, and it helps make the connection better. One thing to note is that one of the cool things about solder is that it actually is attracted to metal. So when I first started soldering, I was worried that the solder would kind of go everywhere and the solder would kind of run into different joints. But it does. I mean, there is that possibility, but the reality is that solder generally wants to stick to other metals more than it wants to stick to itself. So what'll happen is it'll actually flow into the metal, and so it'll be, the solder itself is built so that it is not likely to kind of bridge different connections. It's very likely to stay where it's supposed to. There's occasion when it doesn't, and you can clean it up, but it's kind of built to be somewhat foolproof. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and plug mine in. Excuse me for a second. Sorry. All right, so this takes about a minute to warm up. So while this warms up, I'm going to show you how I'm going to prepare to put these headers on. And so what I've got here is I've got a little mini breadboard. So you can see this little tiny breadboard, and it's about the right size for a Nano. And so now what I've already done is I've taken the Nano, and you saw me kind of just manually put in the headers onto here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this as it is, and I'm going to put it onto the breadboard, and that's going to kind of hold it still for me. You can do it without this, but I'm just going to set it on the breadboard. Another thing that I have, just kind of funny, in addition to the breadboard, is I actually have a literal breadboard, this little green thing I actually got from my kitchen, and that's just to hold any scraps that might fall. I don't anticipate anything here because I'm on top of a electronics breadboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and I'm holding it in place with my fingers, and so I'm going to put it onto the breadboard, and I'm going to look at it and make sure that the pins are lined up, and then I'm going to gently push it down, kind of alternating pressure side to side to get it to nicely and gently come down in an even manner so I don't bend the pins. Okay, so now I've got it basically down. All right, so this is solid. Now the actual Nano can come up because it's just sitting there. See, I can literally pull it off. But anyway, so that's what we're going to solder. Let's see if I can get a better view. Let's turn down my light a little bit because it's kind of glary. Yeah, so let's see if we can get a better view of those pins. So one thing that I'm really testing out is this little camera setup that I have, and see if it will work. Maybe I want it from the side a little bit. See if I can get it to really work for doing this kind of work. So, all right, we'll see if that works. Lock this in a little bit more. Doesn't like that. There we go. All right, so my soldering iron is getting hot, so I'm going to start by wiping off any existing solder because I always start by I always leave it tinned, but I want to wipe that stuff off. Now this is very, very hot, so it's always good to be careful with it. But my damp rag is going to prevent it from actually harming me. And so you can see it's kind of smoking a little bit. That's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just touch. Let's see here. I don't know how well you can see this, but I'm going to just touch some solder, get it tinned around the edges. This also make sure that I know that it's hot enough. So, and now we're ready to go. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my soldering iron, and I don't know how, I can't see the video, so I don't know how well this is coming through. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of solidify this nano where it's sitting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder the pin that's on this corner and the pin that's on this other corner, just to kind of get a solid basis before I go further. So I'm going to touch, oh, I forgot one other important thing because I'm going blind in my old age. I also need my glasses, which of course I have misplaced. Always good to lose your glasses in the middle of a filming session, but that's the way it is. A live filming session, no less. I had them. Oh well, we'll just have to go without. So anyway, it's a little fuzzy for me, but we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna retin this a little bit. And actually, since we're focused on this and not me, make that a lot bigger for you. That should be helpful. All right. So I'm simply going to touch this and add solder. And now ideally, the solder, you touch the pin with the soldering iron, and then you touch the solder to the pin, and that should allow it to flow. The pin should be hot enough that should cause the solder to heat up enough. But sometimes you actually have to touch it to your soldering iron. So with that, I've now got two joints, and so these are now cool. I can touch them, but now I can pick it up because these are solidly in there. So I only have two of these attached, but it's plenty. And so I'm going to do one final search. I see my glasses case, but I do not see my glasses. This is all good times. Soldering without your glasses on, it's always fun. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. If this looks awful, I'm sorry. I'll try to do it again, maybe with my glasses on. So and you can get a pretty decent amount of solder on there. And it's not going to hurt anything. So that smoke coming up is why you should always do this in a well-ventilated room. So see how I've kind of got some junk. Let's see if I can get that in frame. Some junk on my iron. So I'll take a second and wipe that off. I'll retin the soldering iron slightly. See if I can do that in frame. All right, and then I'll go back to it. So probably also should have wiped the board down a little bit before I started, just because I think I'm getting not the greatest joints. I think I missed one too. When you have solder kind of balling up and standing upright and not following the shaft, that's either because you don't have enough heat or because you either because you don't have enough heat or because it's too dirty. So as you can see, just touch the joint, throw solder in it. You do that for each one. Pull these, you can see better. I feel like I'm doing better on these last ones. Kind of learn to cover for not being able to see them. So then we'll do the bottom ones. We'll start over here. So I'm gonna actually wipe my soldering iron a little bit. I'm going to retin it. And I'm just going to touch, add solder, move to the next one. Touch, add solder. It's probably not enough. You just touch, add solder, move to the next one. 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 And the thing that has the biggest impact on soldering is just practice. As you practice more, you get better. I wouldn't even consider myself good at this point, but it's workable. I solder things and they don't break, so like they still work after soldering. So I consider that a success. One time, occasionally, my biggest problem is actually when I don't put enough solder on it. I have on occasion not had good enough joints. And so that's actually, those can be some nasty, nasty bugs trying to chase when you don't have enough solder and you're like, and so it's not really making the connection. So you're like, why is my project not working? Because there's nothing that seems like it shouldn't be working, but something just isn't making a connection. And sometimes that's because you didn't put enough solder on it. All right, and so let's see here. Looks like I've got a couple of these that don't have enough solder on them. I can see them better on my video screen. Looks like that A3 pin doesn't have enough solder, and maybe the ground pin on the other side. So I'll see if I can get those better handled. So this whole not being able to see is actually pretty new to me. I've had pretty much 20/20 vision my whole life, but recently I've had to get reading glasses, and so that's been a change just for like remembering to have that I need reading glasses. Because most things I see just fine, but when it comes to up close work, I can't see hardly anything. So I think it was this pin. Nope, I think I missed the pin. All right, well, I'll get my glasses out and see if, but you can see for most of those, I've made a pretty solid connection. You want to see basically a cone around it. And so the other thing that we can do is we can physically pull this out now. I'll put my soldering iron down. I can pull this out of the breadboard, and even though I have to use some force to get it, there's enough force on those pins that they're not going anywhere. There's enough solder. And so you can see now the pins are fully in, and there's no getting those out without desoldering them. So there's also another set of pins that go on top. And so these little guys here, and they go into those holes. And so we'll basically have to flip this guy upside down to solder them. So we'll stick them in. Again, I don't have my glasses on, so this is more difficult than it might be for you. And then I'm going to take my soldering iron, clean it off. Going to tin it with some solder. And now I'm going to do these connections. I hope you all can see this well, and I hope I'm doing it well. This one, I'm not quite getting hot enough. There we go. Hmm. All right, I think I kind of murdered that one, but we'll take a look at it. I think it'll work, but I kind of murdered that trace with the too much heat. So I left the soldering iron on there too long, and that's what happens. But I think it's fine for today. So again, mostly what I was trying to do is check out my my camera for this and see how my setup works and give it a test out. But anyway, so that's how you solder header pins onto an Arduino Nano, and I hope you enjoyed it.